The Council ignored Earth's warning. The galaxy paid. The price Ambassador Elena Vasquez had never felt so small in her entire life. And she had stood before presidents, kings, and generals back on Earth without ever feeling this way before. The council chamber was massive beyond anything humans had ever built. A sphere of living crystal that floated in the void between three ancient stars. And inside it sat the representatives of the 12 elder species, who had ruled the galaxy for longer than humanity had existed as a species at all. She walked to the central platform where speakers addressed the council, her boots making soft sounds against the floor that seemed to be made of solidified light. And she could feel the eyes of beings who had mastered space travel when humans were still living in caves. Valkyrie High Speaker sat at the highest seat, his body a beautiful structure of living crystal that caught the light of the three suns and scattered it into rainbows across the chamber. And when he looked at Elena, she saw nothing but boredom in his ancient eyes. The council recognizes Ambassador Elena Vasquez of Earth, he said in a voice that rang like bells. You have requested an emergency session, which is unusual for a species that has only held provisional membership for 3 cycles. So please explain why we should interrupt our important work to hear what you have to say. Elena took a deep breath and activated the holographic display she had brought with her. And suddenly, the center of the chamber filled with images of the galaxy's edge, showing strange patterns of light and darkness that human scientists had been studying for months. Honored members of the council, she began, keeping her voice steady even though her heart was racing. 6 months ago, our deep space observation stations detected unusual energy signatures at the far edge of the galaxy. And at first we thought they were natural phenomena, perhaps a new type of star being born or some cosmic event we had never seen before. She moved her hand and the display zoomed in, showing the patterns more clearly. And several of the alien delegates leaned forward with mild interest, while others did not even bother to look. But our analysts noticed something that troubled them deeply. Elena continued. These patterns were not random, and they were not natural, because they matched formations that we humans know very well from our own history. The Tran delegate, a being that looked like a giant mantis made of silver metal, clicked its mandibles in what might have been laughter, and Elena ignored it and kept speaking. These are staging patterns, she said, her voice growing stronger. This is what an invasion force looks like when it is preparing to attack. And we have seen this before in our wars, in the way armies gather before they strike. And the mathematics are unmistakable to anyone who has studied military strategy. Now there was real laughter in the chamber, or what passed for laughter among species that had evolved on worlds far from Earth. And the Valkyrie High Speaker raised one crystalline hand to silence the noise. Ambassador Vasquez, he said. And his tone was the kind of patient condescension that adults use when speaking to children who have said something foolish. I understand that your species is young, and I understand that you come from a world with a violent history. But you must understand something about the galaxy you have joined. He gestured widely with his arms, and the chamber's walls became transparent, showing the beautiful star-filled void outside for 10,000 years. The Galactic Accords have maintained peace among all civilized species, he said. War is something that primitive societies engage in, and the elder races left such barbarism behind long ago. So when you look at the stars and see invasion patterns, you are seeing reflections of your own violent nature, not reality. Elena felt her face grow hot with frustration, but she kept her composure because she knew that losing her temper would only make things worse. With respect, High Speaker, she said, I am not suggesting that one of the council species is preparing for war, because what I am suggesting is far more serious than that. And the energy signatures we detected do not match any known technology in the galactic database. She pulled up more data. showing graphs and charts that human scientists had worked on for months. And the numbers told a story that made her blood run cold every time she looked at them. "Something is coming from outside our galaxy," she said. "Something we have never encountered before, and whatever it is not coming in peace." The chamber erupted in noise as delegates spoke over each other, some dismissing her claims outright, while others argued that she should at least be allowed to present her evidence fully. But the Velkari High Speaker silenced them all with a sharp ringing sound from his crystalline body. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, "the void between galaxies is vast beyond comprehension, and nothing could survive such a journey, let alone maintain military formations while doing so. So your theory is simply impossible. But the data clearly shows," Elena tried to continue. "The data shows anomalies that your young species does not understand," the High Speaker interrupted. "The Tran have studied cosmic phenomena for 50,000 years, and the Kalmori have mapped the intergalactic void more thoroughly than any other species. So if there were truly something approaching our galaxy, we would know about it." Elena looked around the chamber desperately, searching for any sign of support, and she found only one friendly face among the delegates. A Kalmori named Shalvera, who had always treated humans with kindness and curiosity. But even Shalvera looked uncertain, her 4 eyes blinking in the way that meant she was troubled, but not convinced. And Elena realized that she was fighting a battle she could not win. "I urge the Council to at least send observation vessels to investigate," Elena said, making one final attempt. "The cost would be minimal, and if I am wrong, then you will have proven that humanity's fears were unfounded. But if I am right, if you are right, then we will have wasted valuable resources chasing shadows," the High Speaker said firmly. "Ambassador Vasquez, your concerns have been noted and will be added to the official record. But this council has more important matters to attend to, and we will not indulge the paranoid fantasies of a species that has barely learned to travel between stars." He struck the floor with his staff, and the sound rang through the chamber like a death knell. "This session is concluded," he announced. "Ambassador Vasquez, you may return to your quarters, and I suggest you use the time to study the history of the Galactic Accords so you can better understand the peace that we have built." Elena stood frozen on the platform as the delegates began to leave, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and she wanted to scream at them that they were making a terrible mistake, that their arrogance would cost them everything. But she knew that such an outburst would only confirm their beliefs about humanity. She gathered her data and walked out of the chamber with her head held high. And as she passed Shalvera, the Kalmori touched her arm gently. "I am sorry," Shalvera whispered. "I believe you are sincere, even if I am not certain you are correct. But the elder species have not known fear for a very long time, and they have forgotten what it means to be cautious." Elena nodded and continued walking, her mind already racing with what she would tell Earth. And she knew that humanity would not make the same mistake as the Council if the galaxy would not prepare for what was coming. Then humanity would prepare alone, because that was what humans had always done throughout their violent history. And perhaps that history was not the weakness the Council believed it to be. Perhaps it was humanity's greatest strength. She reached her quarters and immediately began composing a message to Earth, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she described everything that had happened. And she ended with words that would echo through human history in the years to come. "They will not listen," she wrote. "We must prepare ourselves because something is coming, and we will be ready even if we must stand alone, far away on Earth." General Marcus Chen received her message and began making calls to people who had hoped they would never have to fight again. And across the blue planet, old soldiers felt the familiar weight of duty settling back onto their shoulders. The galaxy had ignored Earth's warning, but Earth had not ignored the warning itself. The Council ignored Earth's warning, the galaxy, paid the price. 6 months had passed since Ambassador Vasquez stood before the council. And in that time, the anomalies at the galaxy's edge had grown from strange patterns into something that could no longer be ignored by anyone who bothered to look. But the council did not bother to look, because they were too busy with their important meetings and their ancient traditions and their endless debates about trade agreements and cultural exchanges. And meanwhile, the darkness at the edge of the galaxy grew larger with each passing day. The first sign of real trouble came when Outpost Station Gamma 7 stopped transmitting its regular updates. And the station had been monitoring the outer rim for 300 years without ever missing a single transmission before that date. Valkyrie official in charge of communications noted the silence in his log and assumed it was a technical problem. Perhaps a solar flare had damaged the equipment, or maybe the crew had simply forgotten to send their report on time. And he scheduled a maintenance vessel to investigate when one became available 3 days later. Outpost Station Gamma 12 went dark, and then Gamma 15. And then the entire Gamma network fell silent, one station at a time, like candles being blown out by an invisible wind. The Tron delegate brought the matter before the council with mild concern, suggesting that perhaps the budget for rim maintenance had been cut too deeply in recent years. And the council agreed to form a committee to study the issue and make recommendations. Ambassador Vasquez was not invited to that meeting. She learned about it through Shalvara, who had become something of a friend in the months since Elena's failed warning. And when Elena heard what the council was doing, she laughed bitterly in a way that contained no humor at all. A committee, she said to Shalvara as they walked through the station's gardens. Stations are going silent across the entire rim, and they are forming a committee to study the budget. The council believes there must be a simple explanation, Shalvara said, her 4 eyes looking troubled. They cannot imagine that anything could threaten the peace we have maintained for so long. And what do you believe? Elena Ascagilvera was quiet for a long moment before answering. And when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I believe that the universe does not care what we imagine, she said. I have studied the void between galaxies, and I know that there are things out there that we do not understand. And I'm afraid that we are about to learn a terrible lesson about our own ignorance. Elena nodded grimly and decided that it was time to tell Shalvara something she had been keeping secret. Earth is preparing, she said quietly. We are not waiting for the council to act, because we learned long ago that waiting can be fatal. And we would rather be ready for a threat that never comes than be unprepared for one that does. Shalvara's eyes widened in surprise, and she looked around to make sure no one was listening before leaning closer. What kind of preparations? She asked. Elena told her about Protocol Remnant, about the old warships being pulled from their orbital graveyards and given new weapons and new crews, about the factories that had been making consumer goods, now producing things that the peaceful galaxy had never seen, about the veterans who had thought their fighting days were over, now training for a war they hoped would never come. Your species truly believes something terrible is approaching, Shalvara said when Elena finished, and it was not a question. We know something terrible is approaching, Elena replied. We have seen the signs before in our own history, and we know what happens when warnings are ignored. Back on Earth, General Marcus Chun stood in a command center buried deep beneath a mountain, and the walls around him were covered with screens showing information that would have terrified the council if they had bothered to look. Each red dot on the main display represented a station or colony that had stopped communicating. And there were so many red dots now that the edge of the galaxy looked like it was bleeding. Sir, a young officer said, approaching Chun with a tablet in her hands. We've received the latest report from our scout drones, and the news is not good. Chun took the tablet and read the report, and his weathered face showed no emotion, even though the information made his stomach clench with cold dread. The Drones had gotten closer to the anomalies than any manned vessel would dare to go. And what they had recorded was unlike anything in human history or galactic records, showing massive shapes moving through space in formations that seemed to shift and change like living things. "Have we identified what they are?" Chun asked. "No, sir," the officer replied. "Our best analysts cannot match them to any known species or technology, but they all agree on one thing, which is, whatever these things are, they are not stopping. And based on their current trajectory and speed, they will reach the populated systems within 6 months." Chun handed the tablet back and turned to face the main display. And he stood in silence for a long moment as he considered what needed to be done. "Accelerate all production schedules," he ordered. "I want every ship we have ready for deployment within 4 months. And begin evacuating civilian populations from the outer colonies." "Sir, that will cause panic," another officer warned. "People will demand to know why we are evacuating them." "Tell them the truth," Chun said. "Something is coming, and we are preparing to fight it. Because our people deserve to know what they might be facing. And they deserve the chance to stand with us if they choose." The officer nodded and hurried away to carry out the orders. And Chun continued to stare at the display with its spreading red dots. He thought about his grandfather, who had fought in the last great war on Earth, and had told him stories about what it meant to face an enemy that wanted nothing less than total destruction. And he remembered his grandfather's warning that peace was always temporary, and that the only way to protect it was to be ready to fight for it. The Council had forgotten that lesson, but humanity had not. Across the galaxy, the investigation vessels sent to check on the silent outposts finally reached their destinations. And what they found was nothing at all, because the stations were simply gone as if they had never existed. With no debris and no wreckage and no sign of what had happened to them, the vessels reported their findings back to the Council. And for the first time, a hint of fear crept into the voices of the elder species as they realized that something was very wrong. But even then, they could not bring themselves to believe that the threat was real, because believing meant admitting that their 10,000 years of peace had made them weak. And that admission was too painful for them to accept. The Valkyrie High Speaker called for calm and assured everyone that there must be a rational explanation. And the Tron delegates agreed that more study was needed before any hasty conclusions were reached. And the committee that had been formed expanded into 3 committees and then 5 meanwhile. The darkness at the edge of the galaxy continued to grow, and more stations fell silent. And more red dots appeared on General Chun's display and on Earth. The factories worked day and night, and the warships took shape in orbital construction yards. And millions of soldiers trained for a battle that the rest of the galaxy still refused to believe was coming. Humanity was getting ready, whether anyone else was ready or not. The Council ignored Earth's warning. The galaxy paid the price. The day the harvesters arrived in the populated systems was a day that no survivor would ever forget. And it began with a beautiful sunrise on the Valkyrie homeworld that would be the last sunrise that ancient civilization would ever see. Attack came without warning and without any attempt at communication, because the harvesters did not speak, and did not negotiate, and did not care about the millions of years of history they were about to erase from existence. They simply descended from the sky like a swarm of nightmares given physical form, creatures that seemed to be made of darkness and hunger and nothing else. And they began to feed the Valkyrie, were a proud species who had considered themselves the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. And their homeworld was covered with cities made of living crystal that had taken thousands of years to grow into shapes of impossible beauty. In 6 hours, all of it was gone. The harvesters did not destroy the cities the way a bomb destroys a building or a fire burns a forest, because destruction implies that something remains afterward. And the harvesters left nothing behind at all. They consumed everything. The buildings and the people and the art and the history and even the very ground itself, breaking it all down into raw matter that they absorbed into their endless bodies. And where the most beautiful civilization in the galaxy had stood, there was only empty ground stripped down to bare rock. The Council received the distress signal from the Velcari homeworld and could not believe what they were hearing, because the screams and the desperate pleas for help seemed impossible coming from a species that had never known fear. The High Speaker himself was on the final transmission, his crystalline body cracking and shattering, as the harvesters tore into the council chamber where he had once dismissed humanity's warnings with such confidence. "We were wrong," he screamed as the darkness closed around him. "We were so wrong, and now we are all going to." The transmission cut off and was never resumed. The Tron responded first, because their military was the largest in the galaxy, and they believed that no enemy could stand against the fleet they had built over 50,000 years of careful preparation for threats that had never come. They were wrong. 3,000 Tron warships met the Harvester swarm in the space between stars, and the battle lasted less than an hour before the last Tron vessel was torn apart and consumed, just like everything else the Harvesters touched. The surviving Tron commanders sent frantic reports back to their homeworld describing enemies that did not fight the way any known species fought. Creatures that seemed to exist partially in another dimension, where weapons could not reach them. Swarms that adapted to every tactic within minutes and became immune to whatever had hurt them before. And then the Tran homeworld fell silent too, and another ancient civilization was erased from the galaxy as if it had never existed at all. Panic spread through the remaining council species like wildfire, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the emergency beacon was activated, broadcasting a desperate call for help to every corner of the galaxy. But who was left to answer? Ambassador Shalvera watched the chaos unfold from the council station, which had become a gathering place for refugees fleeing the advancing harvesters. And she searched desperately through the communication channels for any sign of her human friend. "Elena," she transmitted over and over. "Elena, please respond if you can hear this." But there was no response from Earth or from any human vessel. And Shalvera felt a cold weight settle in her chest as she realized what that silence might mean. "They have fallen," she whispered to herself. "The humans were right about everything, and now they have paid for our arrogance with their lives." She was not the only one who believed this, because throughout the station, other survivors spoke in hushed voices about the young species that had tried to warn them. The species that had been mocked and dismissed and sent away. The species that must surely have been the first to die when the harvesters came, because they were so new to space and so unprepared for what the galaxy contained. The irony was too painful to bear. The harvesters continued their advance through the core systems, moving with a terrible efficiency that suggested an intelligence behind their hunger. And one by one the lights of civilization went dark across the galactic map. The Kelmori tried to negotiate, sending messages of peace and offering to share their knowledge and their resources if only the harvesters would stop their advance. The harvesters did not respond, because the harvesters did not care about knowledge or resources or anything except feeding. And the Kelmori homeworld was consumed just like all the others. The Drethkai tried to hide, using their advanced cloaking technology to make their worlds invisible to sensors and their people invisible to scanners. The harvesters found them anyway and fed until nothing remained. The Morath tried to fight with weapons that they had kept secret from the Council for thousands of years. Terrible weapons that could crack planets and ignite stars. The harvesters absorbed the energy and grew stronger. Nothing worked and nothing helped, and the galaxy died one world at a time, while the survivors huddled in whatever safe places remained and waited for the and to come for them too on the council station. Shalvara gathered the remaining delegates in the emergency shelter deep in the station's core, and she looked at the faces around her and saw only despair and resignation and the terrible knowledge of beings who knew they had caused their own destruction. We ignored them, the surviving Drefkai representative said, his voice hollow with grief. The humans warned us, and we called them paranoid children and sent them away. We deserve what is happening to us. Another delegate said, our pride has killed us all. Shalvara could not argue with them because she knew they were right. And she could only sit in the darkness and think about Elena and wonder if her friend had suffered when the harvesters came for Earth. But then something strange happened. One of the technicians monitoring the station's sensors suddenly gasped and began frantically adjusting her equipment. And when the others asked what was wrong, she could only point at the display with a trembling handships. Were emerging from slip space near the Sol system. Not the writhing organic shapes of the harvesters, but angular metal vessels covered with weapons and armor. Ships that looked crude and ugly and brutally functional. Ships that were designed by a species that had been killing and dying in wars. Since before they had learned to write, the humans had not fallen. The humans had not fled. The humans had been preparing, just as Elena had said they would. And now they were coming with fire and steel and 10,000 years of violent history backing every weapon they carried on the council station. Shalvara began to laugh and cry at the same time, because hope was rising in her chest for the first time since the harvesters had arrived, and because she finally understood why humanity had seemed so different from the elder species. They had been different because they had never forgotten what war meant, and they had never believed that peace would last forever, and they had never stopped preparing for the day when something terrible would come and someone would need to stand against it. That day had come, and humanity was ready. The Council ignored Earth's warning. The galaxy paid the price. The galaxy had been burning for months, and the survivors who remained had lost count of how many civilizations had been erased, and how many trillions of lives had been devoured by the endless hunger of the harvesters on the council station. The refugees lived in constant fear, knowing that each day might be their last, and that the harvesters could appear at any moment to finish what they had started. But then the human fleet emerged from slipspace, and everything changed. Shalvara stood at the observation window and watched the human vessels take up defensive positions around the station. And she could not stop the tears that fell from her 4 eyes as she realized that humanity had not abandoned them after all. The ships were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Not elegant or beautiful like the vessels of the elder races, but brutal and functional and covered with weapons that looked like they had been designed by beings who understood violence on a fundamental level. They came back, she whispered. They actually came back for us, beside her. The surviving Drefkai delegate shook his head in disbelief. Why would they? He asked. We mocked them and dismissed them and ignored their warnings. So why would they risk their lives to save us? Before Shalvara could answer, the communication system crackled to life and a human voice filled the station. This is General Marcus Chen of the United Earth Fleet. The voice said, to all survivors on the council station, we are here to evacuate you and provide protection. And we request that you prepare for immediate transport to our vessels. The refugees erupted in confused chatter, and some of them could not believe what they were hearing, while others began weeping with relief. Shalvara activated the communication panel and responded with a shaking voice. General Chun, this is Ambassador Shalvara of the Kelmori, and I speak for the survivors when I say that we are grateful beyond words for your assistance. But I must ask why you have come, when we gave you no reason to expect anything from us. There was a pause before Chun replied, and when he spoke, his voice was tired but firm. Ambassador, I do not have time to explain human nature to you right now, But I can tell you that we do not abandon people who need help, even if those people did not help us when we asked. So please prepare your people for evacuation, because the harvesters will be here soon." The evacuation began immediately, with human shuttles docking at every available port and soldiers in heavy armor guiding the frightened refugees to safety. And Shalvera watched in amazement as humans who had every reason to hate the council species treated them with kindness and efficiency. She found Elena waiting for her on one of the shuttles, and the human ambassador looked older than she had 6 months ago, with lines on her face that had not been there before and shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Elena," Shalvera said, embracing her friend, "I thought you were dead, and I am so glad I was wrong." Elena returned the embrace and managed a tired smile. "We went dark because we did not want the harvesters to know what we were doing," she explained. General Chun believed that secrecy was our best advantage, and he was right. "What have you been doing?" Shalvera asked. Elena led her to a viewing screen and showed her images of the human fleet. And what Shalvera saw made her gasp in shock. The humans had not just built warships. They had built weapons that the galaxy had never imagined. Devices that could tear holes in space itself, and bombs that could make stars explode, and massive cannons that fired projectiles at speeds close to the speed of light. We call them extinction weapons. Elena said quietly, "We built them for ourselves during the dark times of our history, and we hoped we would never have to use them again. But we kept the knowledge because we knew that someday we might face an enemy that could only be stopped with ultimate force. These weapons are terrifying," Shalvera said. "Yes," Elena agreed. "That is the point." The first battle between humans and harvesters came 3 days later, and it was unlike any battle the galaxy had ever witnessed. The harvesters attacked in their usual way, swarming toward the human fleet in overwhelming numbers and expecting to consume these new prey as easily as they had consumed all the others. But the humans did not fight like the elder races. They did not form elegant formations or follow traditional tactics, because human military strategy was built on 10,000 years of killing each other in every way imaginable. And they had learned lessons that the peaceful galaxy had never needed to learn. The human ships moved in seemingly chaotic patterns that confused the harvester swarm. And when the creatures adapted to one tactic, the humans had already switched to something completely different. They used nuclear weapons and antimatter bombs and gravity wells that crushed harvesters into points of infinite density. And when those stopped working, they rammed their own ships into the largest creatures and detonated everything aboard. Human soldiers fought with a ferocity that shocked even the harvesters, because humans did not stop fighting when they were wounded, or when their weapons failed, or even when they were dying. They just kept attacking until their hearts stopped beating, and slowly and possibly, the harvesters began to fall. The battle lasted for 18 hours, and when it ended, the human fleet had lost a third of its vessels and thousands of soldiers had died. But the harvester swarm had been broken and forced to retreat for the first time since they had entered the galaxy on the bridge of his flagship. General Chun surveyed the damage reports and allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction before turning to his officers. "This is only the beginning," he said. "We have hurt them today, but we have not defeated them. So we must press our advantage before they can adapt and learn from what happened here." "Sir, our losses were severe," one of his officers said. "If we continue at this rate, we will not have enough ships or soldiers to finish the fight." Chun nodded because he knew this was true. "Then we will have to make every sacrifice count," he said. "Send word to Earth. Tell them to begin Phase 2. Because we are going to need everything they can send us, far away on Earth." The message was received, and the factories that had been working at full capacity began working even harder. And volunteers lined up by the millions to join the fight against the enemy that had nearly destroyed all life in the galaxy. Humanity was paying a terrible price for the galaxy's survival. But they were willing to pay it, because that was what humans did. They survived. They fought. And they never gave up, no matter how high the cost. The Council ignored Earth's warning. The galaxy paid the price too. Years had passed since the first battle between humans and harvesters. And in that time, the galaxy had witnessed horrors and heroics that would be remembered for as long as any species survived to remember anything at. All the war had spread across every sector of known space, with human fleets hunting harvester swarms while protecting the remnants of civilizations that had once looked down on humanity as primitive. Newcomers General Chun stood on the bridge of his new flagship. They used defiance, and he looked out at the stars with eyes that had seen too much death and too much sacrifice. His hair had turned completely gray during the war, and his face was marked with scars from battles where he had fought alongside his soldiers instead of commanding from safety. Because that was the kind of leader he believed humanity needed. General, his communications officer, called out, "We are receiving reports from all sectors. The final harvester stronghold has been located." Chun turned to face the holographic display that showed the galaxy, and he saw the single red marker that represented the last concentration of harvester forces. They had been driven back across 2 years of brutal fighting, with humans giving their lives by the millions to push the invaders out of one system after another. And now only this final stronghold remained. How many of them? Chun asked. "Our scouts estimate over 10 million individual harvesters." The officer replied, "They have gathered everything they have left for a final defense." "And how many ships do we have?" The officer hesitated before answering, and that hesitation told Chun everything he needed to know about how bad the numbers were. "We have gathered every remaining vessel in the fleet. And with the ships from our allies, we have just over 3,000 combat-capable vessels." Chun nodded slowly, because he had known this moment would come, and he had known that the final battle would require everything. Humanity had left a Givi, opened a channel to the entire fleet, and began to speak. And his words were broadcast not only to the human vessels, but to every surviving alien species that had joined their cause. "This is General Chun to all ships," he said. "You know why we are here, and you know what we face. And you know that many of us will not survive what comes next." He paused and looked at the faces of his crew. Humans and aliens standing side by side in a way that would have been unthinkable before the war began. 2 years ago, the galaxy called us violent and primitive. He continued. "They said we saw enemies in shadows, and that our history of war made us inferior to the peaceful elder races. And maybe they were right about some of that. But they were wrong about one thing. They thought our violence made us weak, when in truth it made us strong. Because we learned long ago that the universe does not care about our hopes or our dreams or our desire for peace. And the only way to survive is to be ready to fight for everything you love." His voice grew harder as he continued. "The harvesters thought they could consume this galaxy the way they consumed others. But they did not understand what they were facing, because they had never encountered a species that refuses to give up, that keeps fighting even when all hope is lost, that would rather die on its feet than live on its knees. Today we end this war," Chun declared. "Today we finish what the harvesters started. And we make sure that no world will ever again suffer what the Valkyrie and the Tron and the Kalmari homeworld suffered. Today we show the universe what humanity is capable of." The battle that followed was the largest and most devastating in the history of any known civilization, with thousands of ships and millions of soldiers fighting against an enemy that had destroyed civilizations. For longer than most species had existed, the harvesters fought with the fury of creatures that knew they were facing extinction, adapting and changing and throwing everything they had against the human-led fleet. But the humans had learned too. And they had spent 2 years fighting these monsters and figuring out their weaknesses and developing weapons that could actually hurt them suicide. Ships packed with antimatter crashed into the largest harvesters and detonated with the force of small suns. And gravity weapons tore holes in the swarm that conventional weapons could exploit. And human soldiers in powered armor boarded the living vessels and fought the creatures from the inside. The cost was staggering. Ships exploded by the hundreds, and brave soldiers died by the thousands. And for every harvester that fell, it seemed like 10 humans gave their lives to make it happen. But slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. The harvester swarm broke apart under the relentless assault, and the creatures began to flee in every direction, trying to escape the fury that humanity had brought upon them. But there was nowhere to run. Human ships hunted down every escaping harvester and destroyed them one by one. And the surviving alien fleets joined the hunt with a vengeance born from 2 years of watching their civilizations be devoured when the last harvester fell. There was no celebration on the human ships, only exhausted relief and the knowledge that the nightmare was finally over. General Chun sat in his command chair and looked at the casualty reports. And the numbers made his heart ache with grief. Earth had lost a third of its population during the war, and many of the outer colonies had been completely destroyed. And countless human soldiers had given their lives to save a galaxy that has missed them as primitive and violent, but they had won. 1 year later, Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood before the council once more. But this time, everything was different. The council chamber was smaller now, with only 5 of the original 12 elder species still existing. And the survivors looked at Elena with something that the galaxy had never shown humanity before: respect, gratitude, fear. Shalvara, who had become the new High Speaker of the Reform Council, addressed Elena with deep emotion in her voice. "Ambassador Vasquez," she said, "the Council wishes to formally apologize for ignoring humanity's warnings, and we wish to express our eternal gratitude for the sacrifice your species made to save us." Elena stood tall and looked at the surviving delegates, and she thought about all the humans who had died to protect the galaxy that had mocked them. "We did not fight for your gratitude," she said quietly. "We fought because it was the right thing to do, and because protecting those who cannot protect themselves is what humans have always done at our best. But I hope you have learned something from this war," she continued. "The universe is not safe, and peace is not permanent. And the price of ignoring warnings can be the death of everything you love." Shalvara nodded solemnly. "We have learned," she said, "and we will never forget." Elena allowed herself a small smile as she looked out at the stars through the chamber's transparent walls. The galaxy had paid a terrible price for ignoring Earth's warning. But thanks to humanity, there was still a galaxy left to rebuild. And this time, when the next warning came, the Council would listen.